He mistook my silence for 3 years as submission and my choice to represent myself as desperation. When I approached the bench, I was not just a betrayed wife, but a forensic auditor armed with irrefutable data. His arrogant smirk died instantly, replaced by the collective gasp of the courtroom as I laid the naked truth bare. My name is Ilara Vance. At 34 years old, I was the chief financial officer of Nexos Dynamics, a position that demanded ice in my veins and a calculator in my head. I brought home $350,000 a year, a salary earned through 80-hour work weeks and missed holidays. My husband, Julian Thorne, brought home ideas. He called himself a serial entrepreneur, but to anyone with a basic understanding of economics, he was a financial black hole dressed in Italian silk. We lived in a penthouse overlooking the steel-gray expanse of Lake Michigan. I had purchased the property 3 months before our wedding, a fact I often reminded myself of when I walked past the guest room. It was no longer a guest room. It was now a virtual golf simulator room, filled with titanium clubs that cost more than my first car. Next to it was a soundproofed recording studio where Julian claimed he was producing a podcast that no one had ever heard. He had colonized my sanctuary, inch by expensive inch, turning my hard-earned equity into a playground for his fleeting hobbies. His mother, Beatrice, often sat on my velvet sofa looking at me with thinly veiled disapproval. You know, Ilara, you're so rigid, Beatrice said one afternoon, sipping the tea I had brewed. Julian needs support, not auditing. A wife's duty isn't just about the money. It's about softening the edges for her man. You make him feel small. I suppressed the urge to show her the mortgage statements. Julian's idea of feeling big involved hosting weekly networking mixers in our living room. Strangers in blazers drank my 18-year-old scotch and ate catered canapes while I sat in my home office, approving the credit card payments for the very party happening outside my door. He played the role of the benevolent host perfectly, while I was merely the invisible financier. The cracks in our foundation became undeniable on our 5-year anniversary. We were at a table by the window at Alinea. I slid a heavy velvet box across the white tablecloth. Inside was a Rolex Submariner, the case back engraved with our initials. Julian gasped, his eyes lighting up with the avarice of a child. "Babe, this is incredible," he stammered, putting it on immediately and admiring the sweep of the second hand. "I got you something too. Not as flashy, but it's about self-care." He handed me a paper envelope. Inside was a voucher for a seaweed wrap at a downtown spa. I smiled continuously, even though my phone had buzzed in my clutch 5 minutes prior. It was a notification from American Express. My supplementary card, the one Julian carried, had just been charged $300 at that exact spa. He had bought my anniversary gift with my own money. 2 weeks later, the other shoe dropped. Julian cornered me in the kitchen while I was making espresso before work. He was wearing his silk robe, leaning against the marble island with a manic glint in his eyes. "I call it Project Aurora," he said, sliding a tablet toward me. "It's the future of green energy. Ilara, I have the contacts. I have the vision. I just need a little push." I took a sip of coffee, feeling the caffeine hit my bloodstream. How much of a push? Julian $100,000, he said, the number rolling off his tongue as if he were asking for $20 for pizza. Just seed money. When this takes off, the returns will be 10 times that. "You could retire, Ilara. We could travel. No more long nights at the office." The mention of my retirement was a calculated hook, but I did not rise to the bait. I set the cup down with a deliberate click. "Send me the business plan," I said, my voice flat. "I need to see the market analysis, the projected cash flow, and the risk assessment." Julian's smile faltered. The charm evaporated, replaced by a tightening of his jaw that I had seen more and more frequently. "I'm your husband, Ilara, not a venture capital firm," he snapped, his voice dropping an octave. Can't you just believe in me for once? It's always about the paperwork with you. I believe in data. Julian, send me the file. I picked up my briefcase and walked out the door without looking back, but I could feel his gaze burning into my back, hot and resentful. I did not know it then, but that was the moment he decided to stop asking and start taking. The numbers on a spreadsheet never lie, but people do. It started with the monthly reconciliation of the American Express Platinum account. Usually, I delegated this task to my assistant, but something compelled me to review the line items myself that Tuesday night. I sat in my home office with a glass of water, scrolling through the digital ledger. There were anomalies, small at first, then glaringly bold. A transaction at a boutique jewelry store for $2,000, a round-trip ticket to Miami in business class, booked under a guest name, a series of substantial payments to a high-end furniture store called Modern Nest. I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. I walked into the living room where Julian was meditating with his noise-canceling headphones. I tapped him on the shoulder, holding the printed statement. Julian, what are these charges? $2,000 for jewelry, who is flying to Miami. He blinked, pulling off the headphones with a look of practiced confusion. Oh, that babe. Those are business expenses. Gifts for potential angel investors. The Miami trip was for a consultant who is going to help me launch Aurora. You know I have to woo them. You are wooing investors with diamond pendants and velvet sofas, I asked, my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. It's about image. Ilara. He stood up, pacing the room with agitated energy. You don't understand the startup world. It's all about perception. I need them to think I'm successful before I actually am. Just trust me. I did not trust him. In finance, unexplained variance was a symptom of fraud. The next morning, instead of focusing on the quarterly earnings report for Nexos Dynamics, I logged into the telematics system of the Tesla Model S. I had paid for the car in cash, so the title and the administrative access remained firmly in my name. I activated the historical location tracking. The data painted a map of deceit. Julian claimed he spent his days at a co-working space downtown called The Hive. The GPS history told a different story. For the past 3 months, the car had spent every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon parked at a residential complex in the suburbs, 40 minutes north of the city. He would arrive at 1 in the afternoon and leave at 5. That evening, Julian returned home smelling of vanilla and cheap musk, a scent that clashed violently with the Joe Malone Reed diffusers I kept in the hallway. Meeting ran late, he muttered, loosening his tie. I am absolutely drained. I'm going to shower. I waited until the water started running. Then I picked up the iPad Pro he had left on the kitchen island. It was password protected, but Julian was lazy with his digital hygiene. He was still logged into our shared iCloud family account. I navigated to the Photos app. My heart hammered against my ribs, a dull, rhythmic thud that echoed in my ears. I scrolled past the photos of his golf outings and our stiff dinner parties until I found a hidden folder titled Future Home. I tapped it. The screen filled with images that sucked the air out of my lungs. There was Julian, smiling a genuine, unguarded smile I had not seen in years. He had his arms wrapped around a young woman with platinum blonde hair. I recognized the background. It was the interior of the apartment complex in the suburbs, furnished with the very items I had seen on the credit card statement. I swiped left. The next photo shattered me. The woman Sienna, as the caption read, was wearing a tight dress that accentuated a distinct baby bump. Julian was kneeling, kissing her stomach. I swiped again. Receipts. Ultrasound scans. A screenshot of a bank transfer for $5,000 labeled Nursery Prep. He was not just cheating on me. He was building an entire secondary life, funding a new family with the wealth I had sacrificed my youth to accumulate. The water in the shower turned off. For a moment, I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the iPad against the marble countertop and wail like a wounded animal. But then, A switch flipped inside my brain. The emotional center shut down, and the analytical engine roared to life. This was no longer a marriage. This was a hostile takeover. I placed the iPad back exactly where it was. I smoothed my skirt and walked to the refrigerator to pour a glass of sparkling water. I did not shed a single tear. Tears were a luxury for those who could afford to lose. I was Alara Vance, and I was about to audit Julian Thorne out of existence. I treated the dissolution of my marriage like a corporate restructuring. The first step was due diligence. I hired a private investigator who returned within 48 hours with a digital dossier thick enough to be a weapon. The report confirmed that Sienna was not a strategic business partner as Julian had claimed. She was an aspiring Instagram model whose primary talent seemed to be posing next to luxury vehicles she did not own. The timeline of their affair matched perfectly with the gaps in Julian's schedule, and the photographs provided high-resolution proof of their intimacy. Once the emotional variables were isolated, I moved to the financials. I spent the entire weekend auditing our accounts, tracing every dollar back 3 years. The spreadsheet grew longer and uglier with every hour. I found the investments in his shell companies, the exorbitant consulting fees, and the cash withdrawals at ATMs near Sienna's apartment complex. The grand total of his embezzlement came to $250,000. He had been siphoning my earnings to fund his infidelity while criticizing my spending on groceries. I met with a divorce attorney on Monday morning, a shark named Davidson who charged $600 an hour. "Don't tip your hand until the assets are frozen," Davidson advised, leaning back in his leather chair. "If he senses a divorce, he will hide the remaining cash. We need to blindside him." I did not file the papers immediately. Instead, I initiated a digital blockade. I logged into the primary banking portal and changed the passwords to the checking accounts, the brokerage funds, and the retirement trusts. I canceled his supplementary American Express card and revoked his power of attorney regarding our stock portfolio. I did this with the dispassionate efficiency of a surgeon cutting out necrotic tissue. The first casualty was his ego. He was at Le Monde, a French bistro he favored for lunch to impress his imaginary clients. My phone rang at 1:30 in the afternoon. "Ilara." "The card was declined," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm with a client. The waiter is looking at me like I'm a criminal." "Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Fix it." I took a sip of my water, staring at the Chicago skyline from my office window. "It must be system maintenance." I lied smoothly. "The bank sent a notice about outages. Try cash. Julian." I hung up before he could respond. By the time he stormed home at 5 o'clock, the locks to the penthouse had been recoded. I had packed his belongings, his designer suits, his golf clubs, and his recording equipment into 4 large suitcases and left them in the hallway outside the penthouse door. I stood on the other side of the threshold, watching the security feed on my phone as he tried the code. Failed. And then began pounding on the door. I opened it, leaving the security chain attached. He looked disheveled and furious, his face flushed with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, pointing at the luggage. "Why is my stuff in the hall? Are you insane?" I looked him in the eye, my expression unreadable. "I know about Sienna," I said, my voice devoid of tremor. "I know about the apartment in the suburbs. I know about the baby." The color drained from his face instantly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Panic flickered in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by the cornered rat look I had seen in desperate business rivals. You checked my phone," he stammered. Then his face hardened into a sneer. "You think you can just throw me out? I know things. Alara, I know about the confidential merger talks at Nexos. You kick me out, and I will leak everything. I will ruin your reputation. I'll tell everyone you're mentally unstable and abusive." It was a pathetic attempt at blackmail, but I had anticipated it. "You have 30 minutes to get your things off the property before I call building security," I said, checking the time on my phone. And Julian, if you mention Nexos to anyone, I will make sure the IRS sees the tax returns where you failed to declare that consulting income you stole from me. Enjoy your new life. I slammed the door and locked the deadbolt. Through the thick wood, I heard him kick a suitcase, followed by a string of muffled curses. I leaned my back against the door and took a deep breath. The war had officially begun. Julian wasted no time in spinning the narrative. Within 48 hours of being evicted, he had settled into Sienna's apartment and launched a calculated smear campaign on social media. I watched in disgusted fascination as he posted a black and white photo of himself looking out a window, captioned with a 3,000-word essay about toxic ambition and being discarded like a worn-out accessory by a partner who valued net worth over human connection. He never named me directly, but in our circle, the target was unmistakable. The first direct assault came from his mother, Beatrice. My phone rang while I was reviewing a merger proposal. "You heartless, vindictive woman," Beatrice screamed the moment I answered. "He is sleeping on a couch. A couch. Ilara, after everything he did for you, you think just because you make the money, you own the person. He told me how you controlled him, how you made him beg for every cent. Beatrice, he stole. Don't you dare lie to me." She cut me off, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "He is trying to build a future, and you cut his legs out from under him out of pure, sick jealousy. You never deserved him. You are going to pay for this. Ilara, karma is real." She hung up before I could mention the pregnant mistress or the embezzlement, but Beatrice was merely the opening act. The main event arrived in the form of a legal courier 3 days later. Julian had hired Marcus Sterling, a divorce attorney known in Chicago as the Great White Shark. Sterling was expensive, aggressive, and entirely unethical. The legal complaint was a masterpiece of fiction. Julian was filing for divorce on the grounds of irreconcilable differences exacerbated by financial abuse and emotional neglect. I read the demands, and a cold laugh escaped my throat. He was asking for 50% of all marital assets, including a 50% stake in my unvested stock options at Nexos Dynamics. Furthermore, he demanded spousal support in the amount of $10,000 a month for 5 years. His justification was printed in bold text. Mr. Thorne sacrificed his own burgeoning career to manage the household and provide the emotional stability required for Ms. Vance to advance corporately. His guidance and strategic advice were integral to her promotion to CFO. He was claiming credit for my career. He was claiming that his golf games and failed podcasts were the bedrock of my success. The social fallout was immediate. At the office, conversations stopped abruptly when I entered the break room. I received texts from mutual friends that were politely distant. "Just heard about the split. So sorry things got ugly." One read, "They did not know the truth. They only knew Julian's version of the weeping, devoted husband kicked to the curb by the Ice Queen executive." Then came the settlement email from Sterling. It was marked confidential, Ms. Vance. It read, "My client is willing to settle quietly for a lump sum of $500,000 and the monthly stipend requested. If we proceed to court, we will be forced to discuss the sensitive nature of your workplace conduct and the mental instability you displayed at home. We would hate for Nexos Dynamics to worry about their CFO's volatility. It was a threat. Pay up, or we will ruin your professional reputation with lies." Most people in my position would have panicked. They would have hired their own shark, cut a check to make the problem go away, and retreated into the shadows. But as I stared at the email, the fear evaporated. It was replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt dangerous. Julian had made a fatal error. He assumed I would pay to protect my reputation. He forgot that my reputation was built on accuracy, on forensic attention to detail, and on winning battles where the odds were mathematical, not emotional. I picked up the phone and canceled my appointment with Davidson. I did not need a lawyer to translate my life into legal jargon. I did not need a middleman to dilute the venom of the truth. I needed to be the one to look him in the eye when his world crumbled. I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed a single line at the top. Respondent's pretrial statement, Ilara Vance, Pro C. I was going to represent myself, and I was going to destroy him. For the next 3 weeks, the penthouse ceased to be a home and became a war room. I did not sleep more than 4 hours a night. While Julian was likely popping champagne with his new girlfriend and prematurely celebrating his payday, I was buried under a mountain of legal texts. I memorized the Illinois Marriage and Dissolution of Marriage Act. I studied precedents regarding dissipation of marital assets and forensic tracing in divorce proceedings. I absorbed the language of the court until it felt as natural to me as a balance sheet. I did not arrange my evidence based on heartbreak or betrayal. Emotions are inadmissible. Facts are absolute. I created a master matrix on my computer, a chronological spreadsheet that cross-referenced every single lie Julian had told with a corresponding bank transaction, GPS ping, and text message. I color-coded the data, red for direct theft, yellow for fraudulent concealment, blue for the times he was with Sienna while claiming to be at industry conferences. When I zoomed out, it wasn't just a list of grievances, it was a mathematical proof of his parasitism. Then I found the smoking gun in his tax filings. Julian had always insisted on filing separately to protect my liability from his high-risk ventures. I pulled his returns for the last 3 years. In an effort to evade taxes, he had declared his income as zero, categorizing his lifestyle as entirely dependent on my gifts. Yet, in his current legal motion for spousal support, he claimed he had contributed significant financial consulting services to our household. He could not have it both ways. He was either a tax evader or a perjurer. I printed the documents, feeling a cold rush of satisfaction. I did not stop there. I reached out to the former partners Julian had supposedly worked with on his previous failed startups. Julian, one of them, laughed over the phone when I called. Ilara, that guy never wrote a line of code or closed a deal in his life. He just showed up to the launch parties to drink the open bar. We cut him out of the equity pool 2 years ago. I asked him to sign an affidavit stating exactly that. He agreed without hesitation. 3 days before the hearing, my phone buzzed with a message from Julian. You're really going to do this. You think you can beat a Harvard attorney with some Google searches? Don't be stupid. Ilara, just sign the check and save yourself the humiliation. Sienna and I just want to move on. I stared at the screen. He was trying to rattle me. He wanted an angry response, something he could show his lawyer to prove I was unstable. I typed a single character in response, a simple, smiling emoji. I hit send. I imagined him staring at it, confused, his arrogance curdle into uncertainty. Silence was always louder than screaming. At the office, the tension was palpable. My vice president of operations, a woman named Sarah who had been with me since the beginning, closed my office door one afternoon. Ilara, I have to say this, she said, her voice low. I know you are brilliant. You are the best CFO I have ever seen. But this is court. It's a different game. Julian has a shark. Please, for your own sake, hire a professional. I looked up from the binder I was organizing. A lawyer would look at the summary, I said calmly. A lawyer would try to settle to save time. No one understands these numbers better than I do. Sarah, I lived these numbers. Every dollar he stole is a minute of my life I won't get back. I don't want a settlement. I want a reckoning. The night before the trial, the city was quiet. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway, wearing the navy blue suit I intended to wear to court. I did not look like a victim. I did not look like a scorned wife. I looked like a CEO preparing for a hostile board meeting. I rehearsed my opening statement. I did not practice crying. I did not practice pausing for sympathy. I practiced the cadence of absolute, undeniable truth. Your Honor, I said to my reflection, my voice steady in the empty apartment. The numbers you are about to see are not estimates. They are evidence of a systematic campaign of financial deception. I went to bed at 10 o'clock and slept soundly for the first time in a month. I was ready. The courtroom was stiflingly hot, filled with the murmurs of Julian's supporters. He had packed the gallery with his relatives and friends, a strategic move designed to intimidate me. I sat alone at the respondent's table, my back straight, my hands resting on the cool surface of the mahogany table. To my left, the benches were crowded. I could hear Beatrice whispering loudly to her sister. "She looks so smug," Beatrice hissed, her voice carrying across the aisle. "Just wait until the judge hears what she did. It's shameful." I did not turn my head. I focused on the empty chair where the judge would sit. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bailiff bellowed for us to rise. Judge Harrison entered. He was a man in his 60s with a face carved from granite and a reputation for shredding unprepared lawyers. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked over the rim at the packed room. The whispering died instantly. Marcus Sterling, Julian's high-priced attorney, stood up to deliver his opening statement. He was theatrical, pacing in front of the bench, using his hands to weave a narrative of tragedy. "Your Honor, this is a tragedy. A story of a man who gave everything." Sterling began, his voice dripping with rehearsed gravity. A story of a man who sacrificed his prime years to build a home, to support a high-powered wife, only to be discarded when he became inconvenient. I watched him with the detached interest of a scientist observing a specimen. He was good, I had to admit. He painted a picture of domestic bliss destroyed by my avarice. When Julian took the stand, he delivered the performance of his life. He wore a suit that was slightly too large, likely borrowed to make him look frail and diminished. When Sterling asked him about the night I evicted him, Julian paused, his lip trembling. It was terrifying," Julian said, his voice breaking. "I came home to find my life in boxes. She didn't even let me explain. She just threw me out into the cold, without a single penny to my name. I had nowhere to go." He wiped a tear from his cheek, from the gallery. I heard Beatrice let out a sympathetic sob. Sterling pressed on. "Mr. Thorne, your wife claims you were unfaithful. Is there any truth to this?" Julian looked directly at the judge, his eyes wide and innocent. "Absolutely not." "Your Honor," he said firmly, "I have been faithful since the day we met. Ilara is obsessed with money. She invented this affair because she knew that if she divorced me, she would have to share her assets. She is trying to cheat me out of my rights." Sterling then produced a stack of documents. "Your Honor, I present Exhibit A," Sterling announced. "These are invoices showing Mr. Thorne's extensive financial contributions to the household maintenance. He managed contractors, oversaw renovations, and acted as a property manager. His labor has value." I glanced at the papers from my distance. They were crude fabrications, likely typed up the night before. I knew for a fact that the contractors he listed were companies that did not exist. Throughout all of this, I remained motionless. I did not object. I did not shake my head. I did not scoff. I simply wrote in my notebook, "To the room." My silence looked like defeat. I could feel the pitying glances from the court reporter. I could feel the triumphant energy radiating from Julian's side of the room. They thought I was overwhelmed. They thought I was a woman drowning in legal technicalities, regretting the decision to represent myself. Judge Harrison looked at me, his brow furrowed. "Ms. Vance," he said, "do you have any objections to the introduction of these documents?" I stood up slowly. "No objection at this time, Your Honor." I sat back down. Sterling looked surprised, then pleased. He wrapped up his questioning with a flourish, believing he had just nailed the coffin shut on my defense. As Julian stepped down from the witness stand to return to his seat, he passed by my table. He slowed down just enough to look at me. The tearful victim mask slipped for a split second, replaced by a smirk of pure malice. He winked at me, a tiny, arrogant gesture that screamed victory. He really thought I was finished. He had no idea that I was just waiting for him to finish digging his own grave. "Your witness, Ms. Vance," Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing slightly in the wood-paneled room. The gallery shifted, expecting me to stumble. They expected the broken wife to stammer through a few emotional pleas. I stood up and buttoned my blazer with a sharp snap. I picked up my blue folder, not with the trembling hands of a victim, but with the precision of an executioner. I walked to the podium, the click of my heels cutting through the whispers until the room fell into a stunned silence. I looked Julian in the eye. He blinked, the smirk faltering just a fraction. "Mr. Thorne," I began, my voice clear and projected. "You stated just moments ago, under oath, that you were completely financially dependent on me during the last 3 years of our marriage. Is that correct?" Julian straightened his tie, regaining his composure. He leaned into the microphone. "That is correct," he said, his tone dripping with practiced martyrdom. "I put my career on hold to support yours. I had no income of my own. So, you confirm, under penalty of perjury, that you had no other revenue streams, no side businesses, no consulting fees, I just told you." Julian sighed, looking at the judge as if to share a joke about my incompetence. "I had nothing." "You controlled everything. Then please explain this," I said. I pulled a stapled document from my folder and placed it on the overhead projector. The image appeared on the screens around the room. "This is the incorporation document for a company called J Ventures, registered in your name 2 years ago. And these," I placed a second sheet down, "are bank statements showing monthly deposits into the J Ventures account from Elite Catering and Vintage Spirits, the very vendors you insisted we use for our networking parties." Julian froze. His eyes darted to the screen, then to Marcus Sterling. I don't," he stammered. "According to these records, you negotiated a 20% kickback on every invoice I paid." I continued, my voice cold. "I paid the bills, and the vendors secretly refunded 20% of that money into your private account. That is not dependency. Mr. Thorne, that is embezzlement. Is this the sacrifice you were referring to? It was referral fees?" Julian blurted out, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "It's standard industry practice. It was pocket money. $30,000 in 2 years is hardly pocket money," I countered. "But let us move on to your work. You are asking for half of my assets because you claim your project, Aurora, was a legitimate business venture that contributed to our potential future wealth. You claimed you worked 40 hours a week on this." "I did," Julian said, seizing the lifeline. It was a revolutionary green energy platform. It was going to change the world. "Excellent," I said. "Since you worked on it so tirelessly, you must know the technical specifications. Please explain to the court the energy conversion efficiency rating of the prototype you were developing." Julian blinked. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at his lawyer, but Sterling could not help him. "The efficiency?" Julian asked, his voice weak. "Yes, the conversion rate." "Was it photovoltaic kinetic? What was the underlying mechanism of the technology you needed $100,000 to fund?" "It was blockchain," Julian said, grasping for a buzzword. "It was a blockchain-based solar algorithm." A ripple of confused laughter went through the room. "Blockchain is a digital ledger system, Mr. Thorne, not an energy generation method," I said, not missing a beat. "Let me ask you something simpler. What was the name of the lead engineer you hired with the seed money you withdrew from our joint savings? I was the visionary," Julian shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "I didn't get into the weeds. I hired consultants." "Name one," I challenged. Objection. Marcus Sterling shot up from his seat, his face flushed. "Your Honor, this is harassment. My client is not on trial for his engineering skills. Whether the business succeeded or failed is irrelevant to the fact that he attempted it." Judge Harrison looked from the sweating, stammering man in the witness box to me. For the first time, the skepticism in his eyes was not directed at me. He banged his gavel once. "Overruled," the judge said, his voice drop-dead serious. "The witness is claiming his professional sacrifice warrants a large settlement. Ms. Vance has every right to determine if that sacrifice actually existed or if it was a fabrication. Continue. Ms. Vance." I turned back to Julian. He was gripping the railing of the witness box so hard his knuckles were white. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the terrified look of a man realizing the ground beneath him was turning into quicksand. I pressed a button on the remote, and the screen behind the witness stand changed. It was no longer a simple list of numbers. It was a timeline. On the left side were dates and times of cash withdrawals from our joint investment account, labeled by Julian as Research and Development. On the right side were screenshots from a public Instagram account belonging to Sienna. "On June 12th, you withdrew $3,000 for server maintenance," I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the courtroom. 2 hours later, Sienna posted this photo of a new Chanel handbag, captioned, "Spoiled by my baby." The price of that bag, $3,000. I clicked to the next slide. August 4th, you withdrew $5,000 for legal retainers. That same weekend, Sienna posted a geo-tagged photo from a private villa in Cabo San Lucas. The rental cost for that weekend, $5,000. Julian stared at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. He looked at the gallery, searching for support, but the murmurs behind him were growing louder. I don't know who that is." He lied, but his voice lacked conviction. "That is just a coincidence." "Is it?" I asked. "Then perhaps you can explain this." I played an audio file. It was a recording from the security camera in our living room. Julian had always assumed the camera only recorded video, but I had upgraded the firmware months ago to capture high-definition audio. His voice filled the courtroom, loud and arrogant, chatting with one of his drinking buddies. "She is a cash cow, man." I just nod, smile, and swipe the card. "She is so busy with her spreadsheets, she doesn't even notice I'm draining the accounts." It is too easy. I'm going to ride this gravy train until the wheels fall off. The collective gasp from the gallery was audible. I glanced at Beatrice. The woman who had just minutes ago been flushed with righteous indignation was now pale as a sheet, her hand covering her mouth in horror. She slumped back in the bench, unable to look at her son. That is taken out of context," Julian shouted, gripping the wood of the witness stand. I was joking. It was locker room talk? "Let us talk about charity then," I said. Ignoring his outburst, I held up a document. "You claimed withdrawals totaling $40,000 last year were donations to a local orphanage. This is the lease agreement for a luxury apartment at the Kensington. It is signed by you, Julian Thorne, and the rent payments match the exact dates and amounts of your so-called charity donations." I walked closer to the stand, holding the paper up for him to see. "You were not feeding orphans. Julian, you were paying rent for your mistress." "That is a lie," he screamed, standing up. "You forged that you are trying to frame me." I calmly picked up another sheet of paper from my table. "This is a notarized affidavit from the bank manager, confirming that these checks were issued from your personal account and deposited directly into the landlord's account." "Are you accusing the bank of forgery too?" He froze. He sank back into the chair, defeated by the weight of the paper in my hand. He was sweating profusely now, the moisture staining the collar of his shirt. I delivered the final blow. "One last question. Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "On February 14th of last year, while I was in London closing the merger for Nexos Dynamics, a charge of $15,000 appeared on your card at Tiffany's. It was for a diamond solitaire ring." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was suffocating. "I never received a ring." "Julian, so, who was wearing $15,000 of my money. Julian looked at the judge, then at his lawyer, and finally at the floor. The arrogant, triumphant smirk that he had worn earlier was entirely erased, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realized he had walked into a trap of his own making. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was drowning, and there was no one left to save him. I turned to Judge Harrison. "No further questions, Your Honor," I said, closing my folder with a definitive snap. His silence is the answer. Marcus Sterling, visibly shaken by Julian's mute collapse, stood to present his closing argument, but Judge Harrison silenced him with a raised hand. "Ms. Vance," the judge said, his voice flat but commanding, "the court will hear your final statement." I stood up for the final time. I did not walk back to the podium. I walked toward the center of the courtroom, standing closer to the judge and in direct line of sight with Julian. I did not consult my notes. The time for logic and spreadsheets was over. This was the reckoning. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and steady, yet carrying a profound weight. Marcus Sterling attempted to define this case using legal terms. I define it using moral ones. He calls this a dispute over marital assets. I call it a consequence for systematic theft. I turned my head and looked directly at Julian. He was hunched over the defense table, avoiding my gaze. "You laughed when I stood here alone." "Julian," I said, forcing him to lift his head with the sheer intensity of my gaze. "You saw me representing myself, pro se, and you assumed I was weak. You thought that because I focus on balance sheets and data, I must be emotionally fragile and legally naive. You thought that without a hired shark, I was defenseless. My voice was not angry, it was heavy with finality. But you forgot, Julian, that I built my career from nothing. I am the architect of my own wealth. I am the one who worked 80 hours a week while you were entertaining your mistress. You are not a victim of a cold wife. You are just the squatting tenant, Julian, a professional parasite who attempted to commit fraud against the one person who trusted you." I turned back to the court. The room was absolutely silent. I could hear the mechanical hum of the air conditioning unit above us. Every eye, the court reporter, the clerk, the spectators, and the press was fixed entirely on me. I am not here to reclaim a stolen heart, Your Honor, I concluded, my voice rising slightly, the emotion finally cracking through the cold, corporate facade. I am here to reclaim justice for my labor. I am here to reclaim the dignity of every minute I worked while he lied. The law must protect the diligent, not the deceitful. I let the words hang in the air for a long moment. Judge Harrison slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He did not look at the exhibits. He looked only at me. When he put his glasses back on, the respect in his eyes was unmistakable. Then he shifted his gaze to Julian, a look of profound, silent distaste passing over his features. Marcus Sterling immediately scrambled to his feet to offer a limp conclusion, attempting to pivot the conversation back to technicalities, but no one was listening. He was just noise. "From the back," Beatrice suddenly rose, pointing an accusing finger at me. "She's lying. She's a manipulative." She was cut off instantly by the heavy voice of the bailiff, who was already moving toward her. "Ma'am, sit down or you will be removed from the courtroom." Beatrice was forced back into her seat, her face purple with thwarted rage. I returned to my table, my back still straight, but my hands, hidden under the table, were trembling lightly. The work was done. I looked across the room at the man who had tried to break me. Julian was now staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. I closed my eyes briefly, felt the tremor subside, and waited for the sound of the gavel. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, the sound like dry thunder in the profound silence. He did not retire to his chambers. He delivered the verdict immediately, a clear sign that the evidence was overwhelming and the decision uncomplicated. The court finds that the petitioner, Mr. Julian Thorne, has failed to substantiate his claims of financial contribution or spousal support entitlement, Judge Harrison stated, his eyes fixed on Julian's bowed head. Furthermore, the court finds irrefutable evidence, presented pro se by Ms. Ilara Vance, establishing a pattern of marital financial fraud and dissipation of assets. The hammer blow landed with the first sentence. The petitioner's request for spousal support is hereby dismissed in its entirety. A low, collective murmur swept through the courtroom, quickly silenced by a stern look from the judge. He continued, detailing the consequences. Mr. Thorne is ordered to repay the sum of $250,000 to Ms. Vance, representing the full amount of documented marital funds diverted for purposes unrelated to the marriage. This repayment shall include all court costs and investigative fees incurred by the respondent. Then came the final, devastating pronouncement that would define Julian's future. The court rules that Mr. Thorne engaged in financial misconduct and dissipation of assets during the marriage. This finding will be noted in the final judgment. The moment Judge Harrison's gavel hit the block, bang! It was not just the end of a trial. It was the sound of Julian's life collapsing. He visibly slumped forward, burying his face in his hands on the defense table. His family, led by a defeated Beatrice, scrambled to gather their belongings and rush out a side door, desperately avoiding the cameras of the few legal reporters who had been tipped off to the potential drama. Their heads were down, their earlier arrogance replaced by public shame. I stood up, collected my blue folder, and walked toward the exit. I ignored the flash of the cameras and the hushed questions from the reporters. I did not stop to gloat or even glance at Julian. I simply put on my dark sunglasses and walked straight to the waiting black SUV my driver had brought. As the car pulled away from the curb, I saw a figure running down the courthouse steps. It was Julian. He was yelling my name, his face contorted in a desperate mix of rage and remorse. Ilara, wait, we can talk. Please, don't do this. The bulletproof glass separated me from his despair. My security detail intercepted him easily, blocking his path. I watched through the window as Julian stood alone on the cold, imposing steps of the courthouse. A single, solitary figure in a cheap, borrowed suit, his shadow long and broken on the pavement. A few months later, the details came to me through the Chicago gossip mill. Julian had been forced to sell his luxury watches and his golf simulator equipment to begin paying off the debt. Without his usual cash flow, he couldn't afford the rent at the Kensington. Sienna, realizing her angel investor was now a walking financial liability, left him. He ended up working as a bartender in a suburban dive, trying to earn enough tips to avoid arrest warrants. I never saw him again. My story concluded not with a bang, but with the quiet satisfaction of competence. I sat in my newly designed corner office at Nexos Dynamics, signing off on a new multi-million-dollar venture. A small notification popped up on my screen. A large, expected transfer had just hit my bank account, the repayment from the sale of Julian's remaining assets. I smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached my eyes. I was finally free, wealthy, and entirely at peace, all thanks to the power of my own numbers. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope Ilara's journey resonated with you. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments below. Please subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story get heard by more people.